Hello and welcome back to The Week in Politics with Michelle Grattan. I'm Caroline Fisher, Associate Professor of Communication at the University of Canberra. Hi Michelle, how are you?
Hello Caroline.
You must be exhausted.
A bit battered after 2 weeks of watching Parliament, which was a fairly rigorous affair.
Well indeed, so it has been a frenetic 2 weeks of Parliament, the penultimate sitting weeks in the parliamentary term, with only 1 week, the budget week, left to go before the election. So, keeping you very busy, we saw Labor attacking the government on the aged care crisis and calling for the Minister, Richard Colbeck, to resign. And really concerningly, we saw the government clearly positioning national security as a central election issue and launching what is a disinformation campaign, effectively, about Labor going soft on China if it wins the election. So, both important issues. Let's start with Minister Colbeck. I mean, is he up to the job? Will he stay?
Well, I think the government generally hasn't been up to the job in aged care. The system, as we know, has had great flaws in it. Therefore, it wasn't able to cope with COVID, either in an earlier wave in Victoria or now more generally. And we've had homes closing down. We've had acute workforce shortages. As for the minister, it's been an incredibly difficult job, but I don't think that he really is up to it. But I think he will stay. The Prime Minister was asked about this week. He stood behind the minister. Now, I know that you can always get the situation where a leader stands behind a colleague until he doesn't. But
with a knife.
But he did say that it was important to have continuity. And after all, we're just weeks away from the election campaign. So my betting is that he would stay, but his record has not been good. And of course, he's made some own goal stupid errors, like going to the cricket when he should have been appearing before that Senate COVID committee.
Okay, so let's turn to the national security issue. So in question time this week, we saw the government accuse Labor of being soft on China, saying Anthony Albanese is China's preferred Prime Minister, and accused Deputy Opposition Leader Richard Marles of being a Manchurian candidate. I mean, these claims are not based in fact and raise concern from the current and a former head of ASIO about the dangers of politicising national security. So why has the government decided to accuse Labor of being weak on China when there is no real evidence to support this?
Because it believes that its two strengths in the coming campaign are national security and the economy. It thinks that despite the latest wave of COVID, the Omicron variant, that the economy will bounce back, and the figures have been good when you compare the Australian economy with experience overseas, and in actual terms as well. We've got very low unemployment now, 4.2%, and we're heading for something in the threes, and really, all things considered, the economy is a plus for the government. Now, national security has traditionally been a positive, and we've seen in previous elections, whether it was Tampa in 2001 and of course the fallout from the attacks in America, that national security has worked for the coalition. Now, in this election, the government is really on the back foot over a number of issues, including aged care, as we were talking about, and it does see an opportunity to paint Labor as soft on national security and especially on China. This is quite irresponsible, I think, but I think Labor fears that it could be effective. It's not taking this for granted at all, and it's difficult for it to combat this attack, and it's probably made more difficult because people still don't really have a grip on Anthony Albanese and what he's about and what he stands for. That, in a way, sounds ridiculous because he's been around so long. He was a senior figure in the Labor government, and yet he is somewhat undefined. So the government combine that with the uncertain times, and what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, of course, feeds into this, and say, well, national security is a really big issue, and China is becoming more aggressive, more assertive. Labor won't be as tough as the government. We'll see how it resonates.
Okay, so, but unusually we've seen the ASIO chiefs, you know, buy into the argument, in fact, and speak out about this. I mean, what does it signal that they have chosen to speak up about these false claims?
Well, the present chief, Mike Burgess, I think is very concerned about ASIO being drawn into the political battle, and some of this debate was sparked after he revealed last week that ASIO had disrupted a plot to try to intervene in an election and find target candidates who could later be compromised. Now, as I say, this was disrupted, didn't happen, but that led Peter Dutton, the Defence Minister, to say in Parliament that Anthony Albanese was the Chinese Communist Party's preferred candidate, the preferred Prime Minister, and he referenced what the ASIO chief had said, which was just a link entirely too far and very much, I think, annoyed Burgess because, as I say, he does not want ASIO to be seen as political. And he even went on television to make the point, which showed how serious he thought it was. Now, the former ASIO chief, Dennis Richardson, who's also headed Foreign Affairs and Defence, been Australia's ambassador to the United States, so has plenty of credentials on national security, I think has just seen a total misrepresentation and fears that this really compromises Australia's national interest, that the Chinese can exploit those sorts of divisions, and he is calling out the government for creating differences on China policy between the two sides when differences don't exist.
So will these interventions be enough to combat the claim that the coalition has put out there?
Well, that's the big question, and this debate is only just starting. It will be continued for weeks as we run up towards the election. But I think Labor's fear is that while you get this intervention from stakeholders, from experts, nevertheless, what the electorate hears is the initial claim, because the government is projecting that very loudly, and the government voices tend to override the voices who say, well, that's not really the situation. So Labor is nervous about that, there's no doubt.
I mean, given that it has been proven to be false, that these claims are false, and there's posts out there on social media, and you're right, the election campaign hasn't, technically begun. I mean, should these posts be taken down? Should there be some kind of intervention? If this is the start potentially of ongoing disinformation coming from domestic political players, where are we going to draw the line here? This could get very messy and very dangerous in the election campaign.
I think it's very hard to argue that some such posts should be taken down. It depends, of course, on the content, but the players, the government, supporters, whoever, would be able to argue, well, this is an opinion. It's not a question of black and white, that they can say, well, Labor did this in the past on China. So it becomes very murky. I think that it goes to the whole question that we have canvassed in past years on political advertising. Where do you draw the line? Who draws the line? Is it the media companies? Is it some independent authority? It's just so hard.
And the push by the independents, etc., for legislation around truth in political advertising, these types of incidents likely to see that reinvigorated?
Well, possibly, but I don't know that in the short run that'll lead to anything. I think that from Labor's point of view, it just has to argue the case very strongly when the government makes particular claims. But on the other hand, it has the dilemma that it doesn't want to amplify those claims, because when it responds, then the government comes back and the whole issue is talked about more and the debate is extended onto that ground rather than where Labor wants the debate to be, which is on cost of living, aged care, things like that.
And what about the ukulele, lastly, as a piece of spin? How effective was that, do you think?
I don't think very effective. I think that obviously before elections you get attempts to soften, reshape leaders' images. I think that the public really say, oh well, that's interesting and I like Jenny or whatever, but when they actually vote, I suspect that they don't take too much notice of those things. Although I did feel in a way that it was rather patronising of the Prime Minister after that interview to be saying all over the place in the party room, on radio, how great Jenny was, as though she wouldn't have been good, you know. It just seemed a bit over the top on his part, I felt.
Well, I guess we're going to see a lot more of Jenny between now and election day.
I think she'll have to be out and about a great deal.
Despite the fact that she's not interested in politics. Look, thanks, Michelle. I look forward to talking to you more as we try to make sense of this, this coming election for all of us. So thanks. Have a good week.
A week of recovery.
That's right.
Thanks, Caroline.